Well, good afternoon and welcome to Dallas. My name is Stephen Fagin and I'm the curator here at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. We're located here in downtown Dallas at the site of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. And this is a special program that we do from time to time called Living History, where we invite one of our gifted storytellers to come to the museum and share their personal experience from the 1960s and chat a little bit with you about things that matter to you and answer questions you might have about the time period and how these events from the 1960s relate to your life today. I'd like to start before I introduce our guest speaker and just show you where we're coming to you from. So this is our building. This is the famous Texas School Book Depository, where shots were fired at President Kennedy's limousine over 55 years ago. This is what the building looks like today. Our museum is located on the 6th and 7th floors of the building, and if I can get the mouse over here, I'm pointing to this little room on the ground floor, our media room, and that's where we are broadcasting from. So we are live right here in that room today. And this is what the building looked like 55 years ago. It hasn't really changed all that much, but this whole site became a National Historic Landmark District in 1993, and our museum has been here for 30 years. We opened exactly 30 years ago in 1989. And so our guest speaker today, I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Ernest McMillan, who was a local hero with the Civil Rights Movement. In fact, not just a local hero, but nationally involved in the Civil Rights Movement, and is a longtime friend of this museum and has a long history of working with inner city youth. And thank you so much for being here and being part of this presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm proud to be here with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I want to show you guys what Mr. McMillan looked like back around, I want to say 1971 is when this picture was taken. All right. So here he is, and you were actually, you were incarcerated when this picture was taken, is that correct?
Yeah, I was in handcuffs. I've been escorted by sheriff officers from the airport to the jail. I've been captured in Cincinnati, Ohio, and brought back to Dallas.
Right. So Ernest, since this is somewhat of a unique program, this connection today, did you want to start by asking a few initial questions of our students here before we get started with our presentation?
Well, I don't think I can see them, and I just want to say my heart goes out to you young ladies. I appreciate your attention and your respect for the facilities that you're in. My prayer is that you'll be free soon and able to rejoin your families and society in a good way, and look back on this as a stepping stone to becoming even stronger, more resolute, more productive person in life. So my heart goes out to you, and hope we can learn together about our situation today and what it means to our lives.
Thank you.
Very good. Now, Ernest,
you hear that? One of the girls said amen. Amen to your prayer.
Thank you. Amen.
We are in agreement with that. Thank you.
Ernest, you grew up here in Dallas and attended Booker T. Washington High School here, graduating in 1963. We have a picture of your, is this your graduating class from 1963?
Yeah, that was a senior day. We all got dressed up in different costumes, and we were portraying the Roaring Twenties. That's me on the left with a fake pistol in my hand.
Yeah, there you are right here, aiming a pistol at the photographer. Ernest, let's start our story with your early activism with the NAACP Youth Council here in Dallas. You worked on desegregating the Majestic Theater, a movie theater here not too far away on Elm Street. Can you talk a little bit about the work you did in high school?
Yeah, in high school in those days, Dallas was a segregated city. We all went to segregated schools. Neighborhoods were pretty much all black, all white. In those days, you had to pay to go vote. They called it a poll tax. And we had discrimination on the job as far as wages, as far as security. And so we lived in a situation that was very oppressive. We could move around, but our ceiling to move around was very low to the ground. So we had to break through those barriers. And one thing we decided to do as young people was to get involved in the fight. We could not vote, but we could use our feet and our mouths and our hearts to make action. So there was a segregated theater downtown Dallas called the Majestic, would not allow black people to sit anywhere they wanted to. We had a designated area for black people to sit, and that was in the balcony. And we had to pay the same amount as anybody else, but we could not sit where we wanted. So on Sunday afternoons for a long period of time, the youth council of the NAACP would get dressed up in our fancy suits and dresses after church and go downtown and line up to buy a ticket to go to the main theater. We would be courteously refused admission. We would they would not accept our money, give us a ticket. We would go to the end of the line and work our way back up again, and it would be told the same thing. So we would do this for 3 to 4 hours on Sundays for most of our spring and summer tenure in school, and we were not successful in desegregating that school, but the struggle continued, and we were able to go on and do other things, but that was the main activity for the NAACP. Another thing we had was the state fair. There was a big event here, a state fair, where people from all over the state of Texas would come. They would have rodeos and have cows and things. We'd have rides, carnival rides, big Ferris wheels, Coney Island kind of events. But black people were not allowed entering this place but one time in the whole month. And my birthday was in that month, and so my birthday would be on a day when I couldn't go celebrate it in the state fairgrounds. So one thing the NAACP felt was that this could not stand. We must not abide this. So instead of us marching downtown and with our different school bands and parades and cheerleaders and majorettes and walking into the place and escorting the neighborhood in for Negro Achievement Day, the whole community stopped at the gate and refused to go in. That was a signal to the powers that be that those days are over. We're not going to tolerate this anymore. And that led to finally desegregating the state fair to where it's open to everybody at all times. So those are a couple of things we were doing then.
You graduated, as I said, in the spring of 1963, and you went to Morehouse College in Atlanta. Now, at this time, of course, John F. Kennedy was President of the United States. I'll put a picture of President Kennedy up on the screen here. In June of '63, so just about a month after you graduated high school, John F. Kennedy made a very famous televised address on civil rights and really became the first president to take a firm position in support of civil rights. Was this, as a young person going into college, was this something that you felt was meaningful? Did you feel like it would bring about concrete change?
I think there were a lot of high hopes built around President Kennedy. At that time, the Democratic Party was a party of hate in those days. The Southern congressmen and elected officials ran the government of the United States through senators and congressional elections because they would be elected every year because black people could not vote for them at that time. Even though the counties they represented were majority black, they could not even vote for the person, and so it was not democratic expression. So to have a president coming from that same party and speaking about change and about human dignity and about freedom and the rights of people to have equal rights and equal protection was refreshing, new thing to us. And it captured our imagination and it stirred some hopes in many people. In fact, in those days, you very rarely ever found a house in the black community that did not have a portrait of either Dr. King or John F. Kennedy on their walls. They equated them to men who were fighting for freedom and justice. So at this time, I was coming to graduate from high school and going to college. This was a very tumultuous year. It was a lot of volatility, a lot of action going on around. People were stirring, and not only the people fighting for goodness and for justice and for freedom, but there were people fighting to take us back to slavery and to make it impossible to have integration. And so during those times, there was the assassination of the NAACP chairman of Mississippi. His name was Medgar Evers. He was shot down in his front yard as he entered his house at night by a criminal with a gun, shooting him from a sniper position. There was also the murder of 4 young girls in a church in Birmingham, Alabama. Innocent young people in their teen years or younger who were at church to pray and worship. A bomb exploded in that church, killing all of them and wounded other people. That had happened that summer as well. And so I came to Morehouse College in Atlanta. There was also demonstrations going on in Birmingham calling for justice and equality and the young people who were leading that fight were facing water hose, water cannons, police dogs, police with billy clubs beating them down in the streets. But did not deter the young people. There were thousands of them in the streets fighting for freedom. In spite of all this terror launched against them, instead of having a town that was filled with hate, they were trying to bring about a light of hope and love. And so my coming to Morehouse College is also the year when the March on Washington took place. So there was a lot of hope that we could take our cause to the nation's capital. Hundreds of thousands of people would gather to demand freedom now, demand equal rights, demand equal protection. So I was in a lively time in the history of this country. A lot of disturbing things were happening, but also a lot of hopeful things happening, like Kennedy and the March on Washington. And so when I got to campus, I was being stirred myself, coming from Dallas and fighting for desegregation, and now facing that criminal situation in Atlanta where there were segregated restaurants. They were beating people up with axe handles. They would go into a restaurant, and I got involved in demonstrations against that, and that changed my whole life.
Let's talk about the organization that you became most affiliated with. There were different civil rights organizations, all working towards the same goal, but they had different methods and different rules, I suppose. You joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is better known as SNCC.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about SNCC and how you came to be involved in SNCC.
Okay. SNCC's headquarters was in Atlanta, only a half a mile from where my campus was. SNCC was an organization that gave me a lot of hope because they were doing the work on the ground every day in the Deep South. SNCC was an organization comprised of no members but staff. 150 young men and young women had dropped out of college, had got involved in the struggle, and worked day and night in the Deep South, registering people to vote, organizing campaigns for justice, and so forth. And so I got involved with them from just encountering the leaders of that organization and the members, the staff people in Atlanta. And I became, my mind and imagination was captured because I could see in their eyes and their faces and their actions that they were for real. And so I wanted to become a part of that. In order to become a part of that, I was not an adult. I couldn't sign myself in. They couldn't accept the minor unless I had my parents' permission. But my father, who was a pastor in Atlanta, had separated from my mother, and my mother was in Dallas. They both, without talking to each other, and after hearing what I said, agreed to allow me to join SNCC. They signed a paper saying that I had their permission to join. They knew what I was going to be facing because there was so much danger and the Klan activity in the Deep South, and police acting as Klansmen themselves, bombing houses, bombing churches. And I was going into those same circumstances, but they said, son, if this is really in your heart, if this is something you really care for, if this is important to your being, then follow your heart. And so I did. So with their blessing, I was able to join SNCC, and I got deeply involved in Southwest Georgia, in Mississippi, and in Alabama for the next several years.
Mm-hmm. You had a chance, a very rare opportunity to imagine it today, to meet Dr. Martin Luther King. It was a brief encounter, but I think it's worth sharing with these kids.
Okay, well, I'll try to explain it, but he was a man bigger than life to most of us, but he lived right there in Atlanta. And the school he graduated from was Morehouse. So he was not a stranger to that campus. Whenever he would set foot on the campus, we would hear about it. And he would be like a magnet, and we would draw us to wherever he was. The one time I remember him coming to Morehouse was to speak at the chapel. By the time I got there, the whole place was filled up. People were standing up, no sitting room at all, only standing room only. So I had to stand outside and look inside from a window that had been raised. Mm-hmm. And so having a chance to hear him speak and see him was just dynamite, to have our hero right there where you could actually touch him and see him face to face. And the very next time I was able to see him was in an incident in which I was working with SNCC, and it was asked to deliver some documents to his office for him to sign. And I was the courier to deliver that paperwork. And so I was allowed to go in his office to give him the document. he was in his office. He had his no coat on. He had his tie unloosened. He had his shoes off. He was in his own office and was on the phone talking to someone in France, I believe. And so I had stood by waiting patiently. He looked at me, gave me a hand, saying like he'd be with me in a moment. And when he got off the phone, he shook my hand. He read the documents and signed it and gave it back to me. And I was just floored by that. Because when you actually realize that this is a human being, it's not a toy, it's not a robot, it's something real, a human being. He's not as tall as I thought. He was shorter than me. He's wearing his socks. So just to see him as a human being, just like in breathing and in the flesh, was just brought it all home to me.
Yeah. You came back to Dallas and you enrolled in a campus called Arlington State College, which is today University of Texas at Arlington. But back at this time in the 60s, Arlington State College, their flag, their campus flag, was the Confederate battle flag, and they had an old campus theme, which did not really mesh with your attitude at that time and the activism you had already been involved in throughout the Deep South. So tell us how you navigated that difficult situation at Arlington State College.
Okay. There was a sense in the country that black people were now free than ever before. The Voting Rights Act had passed in 1965, and before that, the Civil Rights Act had passed in 1964. So now, according to the law, black people could eat wherever they wanted to. They could ride anywhere on the buses. They could travel in equal accommodations all over the country, and that we could vote finally, and nobody could deny us the right to vote. So with those kind of things happening nationwide, there are organizations that said, well, SNCC, you've done your job. We're going to give you a scholarship to go back to school and resume your life. I had been out of school for over 2 years. Mm-hmm. And so I took the opportunity as a scholarship from the National Council of Negro Women to go back home and get in that campus. And when I arrived there, it was a shock to me to see a Confederate flag flying over the campus. The very thing we had been fighting against was flying over our heads and prominently displayed. In fact, the football team, the basketball team, the track team, they all wore Confederate uniforms, insignia on their uniforms. Even the band had Confederate flags. They had different events like Old South Week, in which they would dress up like Confederate soldiers or big madams at a concert ball or something, and they would parade around. And we started to fight against this. Not only was the campus dormitory segregated, the teachers were teaching mythological facts. Mm-hmm. They were making it seem like slavery was a happy time, that things were good for black people during slavery. So we were fighting against the curriculum, against the segregated dormitories, as well as the theme and the inequalities in the campuses, and had petitions signed. We had rallies and demonstrations. We formed an organization called the Student Congress on Racial Equality, which included Latinos, African Americans, and Anglos working together to make a change at Arlington State. I was expelled from the campus for my activities, and that led me to say, what am I going to do with my life? And it didn't take me long to figure out that I need to stay involved. So I joined the fight against the war in Vietnam. We began to study the law about how can you select somebody to go to the service to fight. They had a way a person 18 years of age was legally bound to join the Army, the Air Force, and Marines. They had no choice. It wasn't a volunteer army at all. And so we decided to look into the laws about this. We discovered that there were loopholes, that if a person had any kind of idea what the law was calling for, you could fight it. But we weren't aware of that law. Only people that had lawyers and had money to stay out of war were being able to stay out. For example, if you had pre-registered in the college camp, you get an exemption. You wouldn't have to go to the war. If you decided to go to divinity school, you could get an exemption. You couldn't be drafted. Different things like that. So we discovered those, and we began to counsel people on their rights. As a result of that, everyone we counseled was not drafted. So we were being very successful. But at the same time, we were creating anger from the establishment, the congressmen, the people who wanted the war to take young black and brown souls to fight the war for them. So we were challenged by the courts. I was accused of draft evasion. We were told that we were communists, that the people who were with us were misleading us, and that we had no right to fight the war in this way, that we were not being patriotic. So some people left the country out of fear that their lives were going to be taken away from them. I decided to stay. They charged me with draft evasion, and I was given a conviction of 5 years for that. But I stayed on the streets, continued to fight, and we organized on the southern part of Dallas, which is where most of the minority community lived in Dallas, and we began to organize for economic rights, began to develop our own newsletter and newspaper, and began to talk about being proud of our culture and our history, and being embracing those things, our history more, as well as fighting for political rights as far as electing officials who represented our neighborhoods. So those are different efforts we were fighting for, and it led us to create a strong voice for welfare rights, for economic rights, and for food health safety as well, for food security. And one of the things we were fighting for—
I just want to point you out in this photograph real quick. So the picture on the screen here is from about 1968 or so, right, here in Dallas. And this is the local chapter of SNCC, because you helped co-found a Dallas chapter of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Mr. McMillan is the gentleman here on the far right. You don't look very happy in this particular photograph.
I think the sun was beaming down on us pretty hot.
But and then directly below you here on this first row, that's your mom, who was also very active. Mama Mac, as she was called, Eva McMillan.
And she's still active today. And the woman to her immediate, her right would be my soon-to-be wife, Felicia, and next to her is my sister, Jackie. And these are all people that would represent a part of the Dallas chapter for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The woman standing up in the back, the two women standing in the back next to me are women who led the welfare rights struggle, demanding to raise the amount of money women with dependent children could have to live, because in those days you could only get $80 a month to take care of a family of 4. So they sat in along with us in the welfare office for 3 days, demanding that limit be raised, and we were successful in getting that done.
Yeah. So it was very much a family affair. I want to point that out, that your entire clan was involved in activism in Dallas in those days. Now, you were starting to talk about some of the health and safety activism you got involved in, which at one time involved a chain of supermarkets called OK Supermarket. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about OK Supermarket.
Okay. We had no major supermarkets in southern Dallas. We had the little convenience stores that had things on the shelves, but the prices were really high. So we were paying exorbitant prices, where if you could go to a normal grocery store, you could pay less than half of what they were charging you. And so, but we had no choices, because these were the only stores in our neighborhood. One of those chains of stores called OK Supermarket. They had 10 of their 11 stores in the black community. And each one of those stores was selling meat that was not graded. They were selling food at ridiculous prices. They were refusing to hire people from the neighborhood to be employees, and they were rude and disrespectful. They would even tell people that you don't have to pay any money. We'll just keep a little log. When you come back next week with your paycheck, we'll add it up then. But always that figure will be at least 20 to 30% more than you actually paid for it. So you had to have a carrying charge for the food you bought, which was already priced high. So with these different things, we went around the community and had mass meetings at several different churches in the month of June of 1968. And everywhere we went, the issues about police brutality, the issue about employment and things like that would come. But the number one issue to people's mind there was the lack of food security, the lack of adequate and decent nutritional options for them. And so we decided to launch a campaign and boycott that store and demand that they change their policies. As a result of that, we went inside the store for the very first day to kick it off, and our plan was to go into the store to purchase merchandise, but collect merchandise to take it to the counter. But when we got to the counter, we would say, "I'm not paying for it," and walk out. Right. We had this going, and people were going to the meat butcher and saying to him, "I'd like some meat cut up this way, and put it in a package." When they got to the counter, they refused to pay for it. So we may have 40 to 50 people in the store who were shopping but not paying for anything.
Right.
As a result of that, some merchandise was damaged. I was charged by the police of dropping a gallon of milk in the store, and they said this was a planned conspiracy. So I, being the leader of the demonstration, was charged with destruction of private property. I was convicted in court and charged with that crime. And me and another gentleman who was named Matthew Johnson was the co-leader. We were singled out as being the leader, so we were given each 10-year sentences. 10 years to be in prison for having that boycott, which was successful. The store was able to have 90% of its customers refuse to go in. They wanted to sell the store. As us, we brought in a consultant from Atlanta with a supermarket that said he would buy those stores and put it in our hands. We would have a cooperative agreement. But all this was happening at the same time they were charging us and locking us up. So that never came to be. But our plan was not only to change their policy, but to have ownership in the hands of the people in that community. But it led to a lot of things happening between those things.
Yeah. And I want to make sure we have time to take some questions from these folks, but give a little summary of your life over the next several years, because this incident, essentially the breaking of a gallon of milk, changed your life forever and really affected the next decade or so of your existence. Tell us about that.
Well, they told me when I was given the 10-year sentence that they were at a pine box waiting for me in prison, that I wasn't going to make it out of there alive. I was placed in solitary confinement. I was beaten several times for refusing to work on a Sunday. And we had other people we faced who were being punished or brutalized by what they call a system of buildington. These were inmates who were given the power over other inmates to open up the gates in jail cells, and were also given the right and the power to beat up people too. So we protested those things that led to a movement to reform the prisons. So it ended the building tender system. It ended how they could manipulate your good time and so forth like that. So coming out of prison, I just was hired by a state representative who led the fight for prison reform. Her name is Eddie Bernice Johnson. She became a congresswoman, Eddie Bernice Johnson, today. And she hired me as a legislative aide in charge of community liaison. And so with that work, I was able to start getting back into the community straight out of prison and resume my work in the neighborhoods. And also following that, I moved to Houston and started a youth organization there. This was in the 80s, because in the 80s, the crime rate, our black communities was marked with violence, gang warfare over drugs and so forth, and turf rights. And the neighborhood I worked in Houston was called Fifth Ward. It's still called Fifth Ward, but in those days it was called the Bloody Fifth, because it was one of the most highest incidents of violence in all of Houston. In fact, if you look at the two zip codes for Houston, Fifth Ward, there was 77020 and 77026. Those two zip codes contributed the greatest number of prisoners to the Texas prisons than any other zip codes in Texas. So we had a majority African American and Latino boys and men being locked up in jail and prison behind the use of drugs and crime and lack of employment options and educational opportunities as well. So I started an organization for young boys from ages 9 to 18 to have a way to develop skills, to develop understanding, to have resources to support them to graduate from high school, go on to college, and become a good father, to become a good neighbor, to one who's going to be caring, loving, and responsible. So that's what our program is. I'm happy to say that program is still going on today. It's called the Fifth Ward Enrichment Program, but they've changed their name now to the Urban Enrichment Program. So they're all over the city of Houston now. And
this is the 35th anniversary of that organization.
35 years, yes.
Wow, that's fantastic. We can touch on other aspects of your personal story, but one of the purposes of these living history presentations is to try and engage our audiences and talk about the things that matter to you. And you have here a living legend of the civil rights movement, someone who really spent a great deal of time and effort and energy fighting for rights and freedom. So if you have questions or things you want to discuss with Mr. McMillan, we want to be able to take some of those questions.
Speak louder, because they can hear you.
Yeah.
Speak loud. Brianna.
We're not able to hear her. I'm not sure why.
She'd like to know if your time sentence from 10 years, was it lowered, or did you have to, serve the entire 10 years?
Okay. Thank you, Brianna. I was given several sentences. One was for destruction of private property. Another was for federal firearms violation. And all those sentences several were dropped, but I was ended up charged with a federal offense and a state offense. The federal offense was 3 years, and the state offense was for 10 years. I went to the federal prison first. I did a year and a half there, was transferred to Texas, where I did another 2.5 years. So I served a total of 3.5 years or so, and locked up in either federal or state penitentiary. And I was released on parole to serve out the remaining time, which is about 7 years on paper, so to speak. But I actually did 3.5 years in prison.
Okay. That's better than 10, she said.
Huh? That's better than 10.
A lot better, but not enough.
Come on up. She would like to know, what's your name? Gabby, and she would like to know, how did you deal with this emotionally? Did you lash out with violence, or when you were incarcerated, how did you deal with that emotionally? Was that difficult for you, and how did you?
Thank you, Gabby. That's probably the heart of the whole thing that we should learn today, is about how do you deal with what's in front of you? How do you address harm and pain? How do you deal with trauma? I must say I'm still addressing it, still dealing with it. I learn more and more each day. I think the healing process is forever. You'll never get totally where you are, but I think I'm a lot better than I was then. Back in those days, I was more of a hothead. I could be provoked very easily to fight. I could be manipulated by people. For example, somebody could come up to me and say, I had sex with your sister, I'm ready to shoot them. Or the police officer would come to me and say, put your shirt tail in. I said, well, I don't have to, and I would go off on him. They would lock me up for disorderly conduct rather than just, and I would fall for their games and their traps. So when your emotions control you, you're at the mercy of everybody, and you are a victim in a sense. And in order to become a survivor, I need to be able to understand my feelings, to address them, to reflect on them, and to let them go. And to me, the whole process of meditation, of being reflective, of finding time to be still, to let things, so when you sit still for a while, things can settle down and you can get a better vision of where you are and what you need to do, and be in touch with your real purpose in life. Sometimes we forget that we're created human beings on life, and we all have a purpose. We all have a skill. We all have a talent. We all have gifts we can give. But when we let emotions and other people manipulate us, and we try to win approval by pleasing other people rather than pleasing ourselves, we fall into a trap of hell in a sense. And we need to break free of that and not pass it on to others and to the next generation. So it's important that where you are now is an opportune time to sit back and reflect, to think about where you are, who you are, because you are a blessing to the world. You are a sun star energy inside your chest that needs to come out. And so learn how to come to terms with yourself, how to express yourself in a way that it comes out. But don't submerge your feelings, don't suppress them, but learn how to channel them to positive ways. Using art, using music, using expression, using your studies, using conversation as a way to channel your energy. Expressing yourself to others is a powerful thing. And not worry about how people see you or think you, but be true to yourself. And so I think that's the first step. And I'm still learning. There's a lot of healing still to do. but I want to make sure that my son and my grandson and my granddaughters are able to count on me to be there for them and to be calm and reflective and honest and open with them. And I think that's where we all have to get, is be a point where we can be, they call the word transparent, being able to be who you are and to live who you are, and that needs to come to the surface. But right now, you're in a situation, it seems, where somebody else has control of your life, and the most important thing in life to me is your being, your life, and your freedom. So how can we use our lives, our breaths, to become more of God, what God intended us to be? And I say God, it could be whatever superior force that guides your life, whatever you want to call it, but there's a superior, invisible being that guides us and is present in our lives. And how can we get in touch with that that's inside our hearts? And so I want to just encourage you to make this time be worthwhile. Don't let it pass you by. Don't fall for anybody's game about taking you here or taking you there, but be the master of your own ship. And that calls for you to have to be reflective and know who you are, have an identity of being the person that God made you.
That was beautiful. I think you missed your calling. You should have been a preacher.
It's not too late.
What did you say?
We have one more.
It's not too
Come
late.
on up. Sure, come on up.
I want to say thank you, Gabby, thank you
Comment?
for that question.
Oh, Gabby says thank you.
And thank her
Go ahead.
for me.
Okay.
To this day, we're still fighting racism. I'm not African American, but I'm Mexican, and I could relate with racism. And my aunt was deported recently, so I just really feel the need that everyone, like, to just, cause I don't know, nowadays, like, you know, the poor, it's mostly African American and Mexican, and like, I feel like we really, like, you know, they leave, like, we have a lot of liquor stores in our corners instead of farmers markets, and like, we're just like, they leave us to kill, like, you know, there's a lot of like gangs and stuff, and like, they let us like kill each other, and like, it's not fair, but like, I feel like education is the only way out. So like, I just feel like, I don't know, I just really agree with what you say, and like, you know, I do feel that racism is like a big problem in our society.
The
Racism.
Okay.
That's an ongoing struggle, and things in some ways they're different than they were in the 1960s, but in other ways the times we live in today are very reflective of the times that you were very active in going around throughout the Deep South and fighting these types of injustices.
Yeah, I'd like to get that young lady's name and thank her for coming forward.
What was your name, honey? What was your name? Sammy. Her name is Sammy.
Sammy.
And I know, yes.
Okay, and Sammy, I couldn't hear every word you said distinctly, but I think I heard you say you were concerned about how races get along together, and you're concerned about how racism divides and harms people, and that you believe in education. There may be some other things you said, but those are the same. Did I leave anything out that she thinks I overlooked?
She was concerned about, you know, right now there's so much racism in her world, and on the corners, instead of there being farmers markets, what did you say there?
Liquor stores.
Too many liquor stores, not enough,
Yeah.
you know, healthy food choices.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that recently her mother was deported, or her aunt was deported, and you know, she just feels that the only way out of this quagmire that we're in, it hasn't gone away. Situations are still the same as they were back in the 60s for many people. Her solution is education.
Yeah. I agree with her. I think I don't want to put education in a real tight box. To me, I'd say the answer is understanding. Understanding through education. Understanding through living your experiences. Understanding through communication. So all those things go through what I call a way of enlightening or open up your mind to options. One part of that is academics, knowing the math and English and science and those kind of things. The other part of that is arts, using your imagination, your creativity. All of those go into education. And you can't separate those things, because the math and the science all are tools to be used to further your well-being, along with your creative side. As far as today's world, you're right. Not too much has changed in the way the system fundamentally operates. We have a society built on wealth and on race. Those two combinations makes it the rule of white men over black, brown, yellow, red men and women. So you have that power dynamics. At the very top are very few. At the bottom are many, many, many. So it's like a pyramid where you have a skinny top and a big wide bottom that props it up. So how can we figure out our relationships? How can we design our connections so that our neighbors are not our enemies, so that our classmates are not our competition, so that our relatives are not disjointed or dysfunctional? How can we do some healing there, right in the school, right in the neighborhood, right in the home? Because that's where it starts. And so I want to just encourage you that be aware of what's around you, be conscious of what you're taking into your body as far as information, as far as the TV, the radio, the music. All of those things can influence you. But I think the number one influencer has got to be your heart. What is your heart, and how much time do we spend on listening to our heart and our inner self, our inner spirit? And so I just want to encourage you to not run off and do things off the cuff, off just spontaneously, but let things sit and think and filter to where you can actually get to the proper action. And so it's dangerous to just fly off the handle and do things just automatically and just knee-jerk reaction, I call it. But let's take time to just pause and think. Sitting still for a while before you think or do open your mouth sometime, it may be the best way, and you'll get stronger, you'll get more eloquent, you'll get more confidence in expressing yourself when you do this. And I just want to say you're in a good place now. It may seem like you're in hell right now, but you're in a safe place, I pray, and that you can have time to think, sort things out, and get the help you need. So when you re-enter, because you're going to come back out, you're going to be with us in the society again. Nobody's going to deny you that. You are for a short term here, but long term is away. So how can you prepare for the long term? And that means linking up with your family, your loved ones, linking up with your community, and help our community become more of a beloved community, and engaging in action that can bring about changes. So that means voting. That means speaking out. That means writing letters to your congressman. That means electing people who need to be representing us and firing those who are already in office. It means taking responsibility for right where you are. So we have to brighten up that spot first. And it looks hopeless. It looks bleak. It looks like there's no way we can win, but yes, we can. We can, and we are. The pathway of history is toward justice and freedom for everyone. We just have to hang in there, keep the fight going strong, and don't give up. We may be knocked down 10 times, but we're going to get up 11 times, okay? Stay strong.
We probably have time for maybe one or two other questions. I think we have about 5 to 10 minutes left with our connection today.
Okay. The teacher says that they have to go out. They have another. Yeah, they have PE right now, and they don't want to miss it.
Okay.
That's a physical education.
Go get that energy going.
I actually have a question, which if we could hang on, you guys could do what you need to do. But can I ask it, or is they ready to walk out?
They're ready to walk out.
The question has to do with the Black Panther organization that was around during the time that you formed. I'm thinking the SNCC. I had not heard of SNCC, so it was interesting. Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was enthralled. I really learned a lot from just listening to you talk about that time period. But I want to know why you decided to form SNCC when, like you said, there were so many other organizations that were cropping up. Why did you decide to make your own instead of joining the ones that were already there? And the most famous one that I've been taught about is the Black Panther organization and what they did during that time.
Yeah.
Were there philosophical disagreements or?
Yeah, we had our differences, but the strategy was the same. It's for uplifting the community and liberation. SNCC came before the Panthers. SNCC was formed in 1961. The Panthers came into being in 1966. So it was SNCC that inspired the Black Panther Party. In Alabama in 1965, the Black Panther Party was established as an organization to get voters to campaign for elected officials in Alabama. In the state of Alabama, you use an insignia to identify your party because not too many people were able to read and write, so they could know the Black Panther stood for this party or the White Rooster stood for this party. So the Panther symbol was used in Alabama well before Huey P. Newton or those folks formed their own organization. And then by 1969, SNCC and the Black Panther Party merged together. The chairman of SNCC became the prime minister for the Black Panther Party. And so the minister of defense, so they merged together. But this is the same time when the police were killing the Panther Party on the streets of Los Angeles and all across the country. 29 Panthers were killed by the police in the month of June in 1969. So there was a horrendous time. They didn't want to see us come together. They did everything they could to liquidate, to neutralize, to destroy the movements, not only the SNCC and the Panther Party, but the anti-war movement, the women's liberation movement, the peace movement. All those movements were attacked by the federal government under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI. That's not the cause of our demise, but they helped speed it up.
If the students are leaving, we certainly want to thank them for being here today and being part of this program. We've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time. The girls were enthralled. There wasn't a drop in the room of noise. They were really focused.
Just one thing that Sammy wanted to tell you is to keep up the good fight. We need you to keep on doing what you do.
Yeah.
We need people like you, she said.
And you keep on doing what you're doing. I admire your role, your work. Keep it up. We partners in this. We're collaborators.
That's right.
All right.
We work together. But thank you very much. They've been reading a lot about civil rights and about not only the Student Nonviolent Committee, but the Southern Leadership Committee with Martin Luther King. So they're really interested in asking a lot of questions about that. Thank you very much.
I just want to say one thing, please. Civil rights is about the legal fight for human rights. Human rights is over-encompassing. So I hope you would teach them about human rights, regardless of what state you live in, or what municipal district you live in, or what country you live in. You have a right to freedom, dignity, and justice wherever you live. That's the United Nations made a Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. I wish you would teach that to the children so they'll know that regardless of where they are, color of the skin, the language they speak, or the religious group they belong to, they have a basic right as a human being. So in Dallas, it may be one thing, civil rights. In California, it may be another, but regardless, there's human rights. I wish you could share the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights with them when you get a chance.
Okay, I will. Thank you very much, both of you, and your museum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
We'll see you again, hopefully.
All right.